Anyone from any field could pivot into data analytics. So I come from a non-tech background. I was a teacher for a few years, ended up moving into like back office operations. And that's where I kind of learned like some analytical skills. So I never had a direct tech or data science or data analytics background. But one of the things that I think is so special about the field is that there's an abundance of resources online. Really anyone can hop online and learn everything they need to be prepared for the job, at least from a technical standpoint.
The role of a data analyst is becoming increasingly important during the internet with employment opportunities from industries like finance to marketing to social media. Because the demand is so strong, data analysts command huge salaries and even greater perks, even at the entry level. But what if you're from a non-tech background? I am your host Anushka, and in this episode we'll talk about how to start a career in data if you belong to a non-tech background. Hi, Matt, and welcome to TopConnect.
Thank you for having me on today. Really excited to have the opportunity to speak with you and to talk about this topic.
Back when I quit my job in January, I sat down and I was thinking about, is it really possible to change functions? Is it really possible for me to change uh, uh, my industries? But as soon as I thought about that, I had to let that thought go because I realized that I don't come from a tech background. So the very first question I have here is that is it really possible for somebody who doesn't belong to the technology background to enter this field?
I totally think anyone from any field could pivot into data analytics. That was the case with myself. So I come from a non-tech background. Super quick summary. I mean, I graduated with a degree in English. I was a teacher for a few years. Ended up moving into like back office operations. And that's where I kind of learned like some analytical skills. And a few years after that, I pivoted into data analytics. So I never had a direct, tech or data science or data analytics background. But one of the things that I think is so special about the field is that there's an abundance of resources online. Really anyone can hop online and with relative low cost compared to a university degree, learn everything they need to be prepared for the job, at least from a technical standpoint, and put together a portfolio to be able to show their skills. And that's something I'd love to talk about later on in the podcast. But I know plenty of other people like me too who've pivoted into data from a non-tech background. In fact, it feels like most of the time the people I talk to don't come from traditional backgrounds. What caught my interest in the field was that it was this kind of like popular up and coming field, but it had a lot of potential really early on in the career path. You know, I saw my wife go through kind of a similar step in a different field that was up and coming at the time when she got into it. I saw that for data, and it's something that I enjoyed. So yeah, I totally think it's not easy, but I totally think that anyone could get into the field.
That's great to know. And that actually makes me curious about what are the key skills that you need to make it this career? How did you go about learning those skills and polishing it over the months or years?
Yeah, great question. So I think from a technical standpoint, key skills are definitely Excel. Next would be SQL, and then a BI tool like Tableau, Power BI. There's others out there that are less popular, but those two have a majority of the market share when it comes to visualization or BI. A lot of times you hear tools like Python. I think if you're looking to get more into actual data science and engineering, it's a good thing to know. But if analytics is more your path, or being a business intelligence analyst, a business analyst, something like that, then the first three skills that I mentioned, Excel, SQL, and then a BI tool are more than enough. But there's an array of soft skills that often get overlooked when it comes to analytics as
Mhm.
well, because it's not just doing coding all day. It's not just building visualizations all day. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on with other departments, with
Mhm.
team members. If you are an analyst, like you're communicating with the engineering team, there's a lot of collaboration, a lot of communication. You have to have some degree of presentation skills, problem solving, critical thinking. And these are the things that you can't really learn through a course per se.
Mhm.
Um, but that you can learn, in previous roles, or your current role, like just something to keep in mind as you're moving towards this career path. For myself, before I got my first job in data, I worked a lot with Excel, which is pretty foundational. I
Mhm.
learned a lot of Excel skills in that operations job I mentioned. But I also started to dabble with Tableau and Power BI there. And so I got a little bit of exposure in my job, but a lot of it was just self taught, especially SQL. That was 100%
Mhm.
self taught. So I'd say those are the foundational skills needed to begin breaking into the field.
I think now that data as a field is so attractive nowadays, I think more and more people are also picking up skills and choosing that as a career path, and that makes me wonder if it's really that difficult to stand out from the crowd, and what are the things that you can do to make your profile or yourself look attractive to somebody who is hiring.
Yeah, great question. Because I think what makes the transition difficult is just how competitive it is. Now, there's a lot of people, especially now, that are trying to transition into the field, but there's also more jobs in data than ever before. So it really is just growing and growing. So the competitive nature shouldn't turn anyone off from going for it. It's still totally possible. But I think some of the biggest things that help people stand out is having a really solid portfolio. Because I do often see people, with their resume or applying for jobs, and they don't have any sort of a portfolio, but
Hmm.
that's pretty critical. That's something I did to stand out when I was initially in the job hunt for my first role in data. Because it's one thing to have certifications, it's one thing to say you know something, but to a hiring manager, or recruiter, certifications don't always mean a whole lot. I mean, they're great to have, but most certifications won't get you very far, but rather demonstrating your knowledge through portfolio projects is going to take you a lot further. So, say like SQL, for instance, if you've never worked with SQL in a job before, putting together some kind of analysis project and then maybe visualizing it in Tableau, Power BI, even Excel, but to just demonstrate that you know how to use the tool. Um, you can also, I think, in your resume, like having a project or a portfolio section, but you could have like a work project section too. Like for me, I used Excel a lot before I was actually in data, and speaking to projects you've ran even in Excel, calling it a work project and the specific skills and functions you use. This is oftentimes, in my experience, what hiring managers and recruiters are looking for. So it's best to have a portfolio, like an actual portfolio showing your projects, and to really put that at the forefront of your resume. The other thing too that I would say is always a really helpful thing is developing a presence, like on LinkedIn, especially. LinkedIn has just a booming data community. I've developed a ton of connections through just getting involved in the LinkedIn platform and beginning to develop connections, even building a personal brand through posting if
Hmm.
someone's comfortable with that. But developing those connections through just consistent interaction, it really can pave the way, one, to referrals potentially with your connections, but also, sometimes recruiters reach out to you. I've had it happen to me. I've seen it happen to others. You're not necessarily going to have recruiters like lining up in your inbox after posting a few times, but it really can cast a net to different companies to, maybe see what you can do. If you maybe post a portfolio project, or on your LinkedIn profile, you have some of your projects or your portfolio showed in your feature section.
Mm-hmm.
I've found those all to be really helpful things to help people stand out and get ahead in the job hunt.
So I think networking, be it any industry you belong to, it just always helps with respect to, getting to know people in the same industry, or, landing jobs that you always wanted. Something that, back when I was considering data science as a career, biggest factor which made me think that, maybe this is not a career for me, is that it's all about coding. So, I've always wondered, is it all about coding?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another great question. I think the degree of coding maybe depends on your role. But I actually think it's a big misconception that any job in data, be it data science or data engineering, is all just coding. Because a lot of the work in this field is project based.
Mm-hmm.
And to fulfill those projects, kind of like I was mentioning earlier, it takes a lot of communication and collaboration. Sometimes you're hopping on, project meetings to talk through where you're at with a project or what's needed, or, if you have a draft finished, you're seeking feedback. So yeah, I think even for myself, I thought it was just kind of going to be working in technical tools all day and just coding all day. And I think that's what a lot of people think it is. And then you get into it and you see that it is much more collaborative at every level, because, you're in this role where you're building out the reporting or the data infrastructure for a company. And to know what your stakeholders and what the company is looking for, you have to seek a lot of feedback. And sometimes it takes a lot of iteration. I mean, sometimes you have projects that take months to complete. And the reason it takes months is because you're kind of going back and forth with feedback. Certainly depends company to company, role to role a little bit. But I think in a lot of ways, that's largely the reality. So yeah, I think that was a great point to bring up there.
So just for our listeners, I just wanted to quickly, go through a recap of what we've discussed so far.
Yeah. So to kind of recap what we were talking about, I think anyone can pivot into data. It's not always going to be easy, but it's more than possible. And to do so, teaching yourself through lots of resources online, the skills that you need, the technical skills, and just in your personal life or whatever, working on those soft skills that are often overlooked. And as you're working through learning skills, developing a project portfolio. So whether you're starting off with guided projects, which there's tons out there, and then moving on to some personal projects and just getting better and better through working with the tools, all the while keeping in mind that once you get into the field, it's not all technical skills, though that is an important aspect of it. And just keeping in mind, for anyone who's keen on getting into that field, the collaborative nature of the role itself. But yeah, I think if anyone follows the things we talked about there, short time or long, anyone can get into the field if they try hard enough.
Thank you so much, Matt, for giving us your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of TopConnect. I hope this episode was very informative for you. If you have any questions related to entering the field of data, feel free to contact Matt. His links are in the description below. Also, if you're listening to this on Spotify, do let us know which topic would you want us to cover next. I'm Anushka and you were listening to TopConnect, an educational podcast by TopMate, hosted and produced by me.